the only solution that we have. It's not to, as I say, to get rid of Trump and get in one of the others. They have failed. That's why we have to have the extremity of Mr. Trump, the extremity in its way of Mr. Sanders, to the great discomfort of the middle. For those of you who can, read the New York Times, the upset of that newspaper. It's rage, it's frustration, it's grasping at anything that might undo what is going on is really reveals everything I've been trying to tell you, including today's banner headline in which it is trying to blame the Russians for the outcome. This is so extraordinary effort. You know that most countries, most major countries in the world, have for decades been interfering in the elections of other countries. This is normal, especially the United States, but not just, anybody who can does. You might even say it's the invisible hand. I wouldn't say it, but one could say it. So what is solution and what does it look like? I don't think it's this or that policy. I don't think it's this or that politician. I think we're beyond that. We've tried all that. It's done. We have to make fundamental changes, and we have to be strong enough to recognize it and then to explore what the fundamental alternatives are and what they might give us. So for lack of a better term, the one I want to suggest to you is worker co-ops. Why would I pick that? Because it's a fundamentally different way of organizing production. Whether it's a factory, an office, or a store, it is a completely different way of understanding what economics is about, what you do when you go to work. It's different if you are part of a collective, of a democratic community that is engaged in production, as opposed to a hierarchical, top-down capitalist enterprise with shareholders, a board of directors, and a mass of workers. So let's begin how it might be different. Suppose a worker co-op organization of an enterprise, and it confronts a problem like people don't want to buy what we produce anymore. We make yellow shirts, and people don't like yellow, or they don't like shirts, and they now want something else. What happens in a capitalist enterprise? Well, first of all, the decision is made by the board of directors and the major shareholder. That's a tiny number of people. The mass of people have nothing to do with this. The mass of people, noticing that the shirts are not flying out of the factory, know that they have now one thing that's important to do, which is to start being very nervous about their jobs. They worry, they get anxiety attacks and panic attacks, they discover Zantac and all the 47 other ways to cope with this sort of thing, and then they worry. The decision is made by a tiny number of people. And if they can't sell, let's say, 20% anymore of those shirts, they lay off 20% of the people. They fire them. There's no point in hiring 20% of the people if the products that those 20% produce you can't sell. So you tell those people, don't come back Monday. This is the last Friday. Good luck to you, and then you forget about them because you're busy working on your company. And then you all know how this plays out. Those 20% workers now have no income. If they have no income, they can't buy things. If they can't buy things, then the people who had jobs producing what they can no longer buy, they lose their jobs. And as this percolates through the economy, we have what's called a recession. By the way, that's where recessions come from. It's one of the ways they happen. It starts somewhere, and then it keeps going, and then we have a self-reinforcing cycle. The irrationality of capitalism is to have not intervened at the first step and said, we can avoid the big problem by doing something about those 20% of the people. Well, what would you do if you were a different economic system? You wouldn't fire them. You'd find something else for that company to do. You'd find a course that they could learn to do something else for which the demand is rising, because you'd go find that. What you would do is not fire 20%. Everybody would do 20% less work, and they would enjoy a leisure. A good thing would come out of the bad thing, because that way you could continue to pay them. You would continue to pay them, and they'd all work, but they'd do less, and their purchasing power wouldn't disappear. And you would prevent that. A rational society would never have done what we do. Because remember the logic, the mathematical logic. If people are buying 20% less shirts, then that money is likely being spent somewhere else. And that's where those workers need to go, to be moved to where the work and the demand exists. We don't do that. We handle it by a decision of an individual entrepreneur who's doing what's best for him or her, which is to lay those people. But what's best for him or her, I hate to tell you this, isn't what's best for everybody. It's not the invisible hand. It's the invisible smack in the face. And it hurts. I didn't pay this fellow to live. He pays to come in here and laugh. Okay. To say this in economic language, a worker co-op has a different set of priorities. It's not driven by profit first. It's driven by work, by the relationships of work, by the relationships among people at the work, by the larger society's well-being, all of which become part of what it is the people who run the enterprise normally think about when they make decisions. You get a different outcome because you have different goals, and you have different people sitting in a different relationship to one another making the decisions. Now, I can't defend all of this in one step. But you know this is what we ought to be discussing, because if I'm right and this is a way out, we are desperately in need of a way out, because everything I told you before is we don't have a way out. Let me give you another example. Taxes. In our system, we have a fundamental contradiction in our tax structure that you have to appreciate. We have really employers on the one hand who pay a tax. Remember the 35% profits tax I told you about a few minutes ago? Employers pay a tax. And you, as working people, you pay a tax, your income tax, right? Every April you do your taxes. Well, if you divide the society into two groups like that, and taxes have to be raised so that we have schools and hospitals and roads and all the other things that are paid for by taxes, you immediately provoke the society into an endless contest in which the businesses try to shift the tax burden onto the people and the people onto the businesses. The problem is the businesses have the resources to win, which is why all of you are screwed. You pay the taxes. Let me give you just a couple of examples. In 1946, at the end of the war, when the power of masses of people, because of the Depression and the war, really made the mass of people powerful, for every dollar raised in taxes by individual income tax, for every dollar that Washington got from individuals, it got $1.50 from corporations. In other words, corporations together paid 50% more in taxes to the government than individuals. Today, the relationship is for every dollar that is paid by individuals, corporations pay 25 cents. Do you understand? From $1.50 to 1 to 25 cents to 1. Over the last 50 years, the burden of taxes has been shifted off of the business community onto you. And the society is riven by that. We now have a president who says, I'm going to cut the corporate tax massively again. Again. And that's the logic of this. You've got two different groups of people, employer, employee. They both want the government to do it. We want the government to give us student loans, and to have a public swimming pool, and to make the roads work, and to have the fire department come. And corporations want the government to give them nice orders, and to build the roads where the trucks are needed. Business has its demands on the government, the masses do. Business pays taxes, the masses do. This is a setup. What business is going to try to do is pay the least while the government does the most. And what we as the masses are going to do is the same thing. We're at each other's throats, whether we're publicly aware of it or not, all the time. And we're losing. You're losing. By the way, will it work, this cutting of the taxes for American corporations? And the answer is, don't be naive. And let me show you. Let me show you with a concrete example. Yesterday's newspaper, the Israeli Times. Why the Israeli Times? Because the Israeli Times carries a front page story that the Knesset, the parliament in Israel, is thinking of cutting their corporate tax from 25% to 6%. Why? Because then no American, even if America cuts it to 15, you're still going to stay in Israel because it's 6. You know what this is called? It's called a race to the bottom. What the United States is doing is provoking every other country in order not to lose what it has acquired in this last 30 years to do the same thing. And not only will that frustrate the United States because it will not get the jobs that he's hoping for, it has a much worse effect. It means that the Israeli government, already on a knife-edge struggle with its own Arab population, is now going to have much less in the way of resources from its corporations, and therefore have to cut back the schools, the hospital, and that's going to blow up Israeli society. And the same thing is happening everywhere else. The system isn't working. That's the message here. For the first time in my life as an adult economics professor, the notion that we may be not in a society having problems, but we may be in a society dying, a particular way of income, of earning our income, is no longer viable. And that the issue is becoming more and more for all of us. Are we going to go down with this ship? Or are we going to get off and go on a different boat in a different direction? Last point. How do you do this? How would you go in a different direction? And here I'd like to make a strong plea that we think a little locally. I even want to thank Steve over here for having pushed the point into my head recently, and he's quite right. We don't have to wait for the federal government, for the state government. We can do these things locally. We can build local worker co-op sectors of our economy to demonstrate how it's different if decisions are made democratically by workers, if the priority is jobs and security and relationships, not profits. If we're not going to be at each other's throat about taxes, because in a worker co-op, the employer and the employee are the same people, so there's not going to be a fight, but who pays the taxes? It's all the same. Now we really deal with the question, how much taxes do we need to have the government do what we want it to do for us? These things are doable, and they're doable at a local level. Imagine if we had a mayor, a city council, local politicians, who were able to say, maybe capitalism is in such serious trouble that we have to now, not later, begin to create the alternatives so that we can see whether they work, so we can explore them, we can experience them, we can try them. We need to have worker co-ops working all over the place so that people who want a job in that kind of a situation will have a place to go and to see. And the rest of us can watch how it works and see if it gets better outcomes. You know, we spend a lot of time saying, well, there's global warming and climate change. We better do something before it gets... Yeah, well, we have the same problem with our economic system. Only we can really do something here, too, if on a local basis we did it. Last point. The British are already ahead of us. I've told you this before. Some of you have heard me. I want to tell you again because some of you haven't. The British Labour Party, the number 2 party in England, which may very well win in the next election. This last week, Mrs. May, the Prime Minister, made a terrible mistake, appeared in a photograph with $1,200 leather pants. These are the sorts of things you cannot do, and she made a mistake. And now that's all that the British people are talking about, her pants.